Thanks for tuning in to the Pacey Performance Podcast this evening. I'm delighted to welcome Joel Smith. So welcome to the podcast, mate.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Rob. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you for coming on. Sad I didn't get to time it perfectly for the new podcast studio, but this will have to do for now. But thank you for coming on. I'm excited to see it, by the way.
It'll be cool. Yeah, it'll be cool. It'll be better than this, the bedroom and the whatever.
Got to do what you got to do. No problem. Anyone doesn't know who you are, just want to give us a bit of a background on yourself, what you're currently doing, and obviously your podcast as well.
Yeah, so I was a track coach turned strength coach turned, I guess, entrepreneur, although I've always had that kind of spirit in me to do fully my own thing. A kid who grew up, I'm going to avoid the hour-long intro, but basically a kid who just grew up completely and utterly obsessed with becoming a better athlete from the time, honestly, I was 5. I mean, this has just been part of me. Did college, did the typical educational routes, bachelor's and master's, did a little research that ended up getting published along the way. That's my one research claim. People might think of me, and I talk of myself as being a very anecdotal, a very the East versus the West type person, but I've gone through the statistical process, and I've been through that portion of it at least once in my life, and it was deemed good enough to actually publish. So there's that. I might have to come back and reference that. Yeah. Reference that if I get a little too esoteric. So anyways, I spent 6 years as a track coach, 2 years at Wisconsin Lacrosse, 4 years at Wilmington College. And that I thought that was my calling for a really long time, because I was a little bit more into, I guess, just that output. Like, how do you make someone run as fast as possible? How do you get someone to jump as high as possible in context with these track and field and athletic skills? Strength and conditioning, or whatever I think the term's changing, athletic performance, whatever.
Changes by the day.
Yeah, whatever it is by the time this gets out. That was not as exciting to me right off the bat. And I think it actually took because that's what I did after the first 6 years. I was a strength coach full-time at UC Berkeley or Cal for about 8 years. And I was never initially that excited about strength and conditioning, because to me, just there was this kind of disconnect between a very controlled, here's a set of squats and cleans, and here's 2 or 3 things about the lift, and versus just the pure chaotic nature of sport, or even just track and field, when there's a lot of very complex factors going into this skill, this high jump, this javelin throw. And so for me, that puzzle was a little more engaging. But as I went through the 8 years at Cal, I was able to really kind of see the athlete from a very complex or multifactorial standpoint. And that growth on my own part at that point, I realized that this can be much more engaging than here's some squat points and here's some velocity-based training markers and hit that. There's so much more that goes into this, and it helped me grow as a person, a coach, everything. And I realized the strength and conditioning, if you will, it's almost like a celebration of everything, because it's so multi and interdisciplinary. So there's that. And then I'm on my own now. I left Cal back at the end of June or July 1st. And I'm here in Ohio now. And what I'm doing is I've taken Just Fly Sports full time, which is my podcast, my website, my books, educational resources. I do online training, and I've taken that full time. And then I've also partnered with a gym, Evolutionary Fitness, here, where I'll have my new podcast studio. So trying to do bigger things with the podcast, training athletes in person, a really diverse range of athletes too. And that was one of the things is, if you work in a university, you're basically training the same people, same sport for an extended period of time. And I think if it's just the strength component and you aren't really doing anything else, I do think the growth really tapers off versus just training. I mean, and even within a university, you can train different athletes, you can do different things. For the scope of what I was doing there, I wasn't getting in any sort of data or metrics or monitoring at all. It's just, here's the team and the lift and trying to fit this to what the coach wants. And there was more evolution for me. And so, yeah, I moved out here to where I am now, and just expanding in everything, coaching all sorts of, a gen pop adult, youth and getting in track and field and all that stuff. So it's exciting. I'm excited to be where I'm at now.
Nice. Sounds exciting. How did you get into the podcast? How did you start? Why did you start?
That's a good question. I almost wanted to ask you the same thing.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm going to ask you at the end of this, because
go for it.
it's funny because after I started my podcast and was a few years down the road, I realized that a lot of these other ones that I was listening to didn't start that much further before I did. But even though it seemed like they were around forever, like yours, Jay DeMayo's, I remember Mike Robertson's, and I guess it was just kind of like, oh, there's some other podcasts. I guess I should do that too. Like I never had a dream or a vision. I think there was really two big reasons. One, just being like, I just think we should do this, I guess. And two, I thought I need to just talk with other coaches and listen to them more. Because I know that I'm a big, like I'm a reader. Like I'll read books and I'll do it. But I think I realized that at some point you don't run out of books to read, but you realize that now you have your structure set by these cornerstone books, but now it's like all about the art of just talking to people and just sharing thoughts and ideas and programs. And so I knew I needed to improve that part of myself. And so there it started. And, you know, it's been a fun ride. So what made you, what led you to start this whole thing?
Tables have turned. Yeah, I'm similar to you, really, to be honest. I knew that I need to speak to more people about more things, whether that be business, whether that be coaching, whether that be, you know, anything. And I thought, well, no one knows who I am. I was working at a university at the time, coaching at a university. And I thought, well, if I get a name of someone that I look up to and think, you know, I'd love to speak to that person, why would they ever speak to me? They don't know who I am. They don't know what I do. They don't know nothing about me. So how can I provide a platform which gives something to them, which therefore allows them to give something to me? And I thought, like, everyone's got a book, everyone's got a website, everyone's got a course, everyone's got a career that they want to push. So I thought, well, I've listened to a few podcasts. I listened to Mike Boyle's. There was a couple over here. Well, one in particular over here. And I thought I could do that. That's a perfect scenario for me to get them on under the proviso that we speak about the things that I want to speak about, and then I give them the floor and they can advertise their book, website, their own podcast, whatever it may be. And that was it, really. It was very just off the cuff, like one weekend, I think. And shall I do it? Yeah, might as well. Monday, it was been recorded on my phone, absolutely horrendous audio quality, and you just kind of learn on the go. And to me, it's that's been the really interesting thing, as well as speaking to interesting people. It's been the journey of learning, as we talked about before, audio editing, bit of video editing, building a website, all that kind of stuff that I would have never have learned and got into if it wasn't for that weekend thinking, yeah, might as well I'll give it a go. So yeah, it's been interesting for me. It's been great. And how now I look back, everything that's happened since like 6 years ago has been because of that. Things that have led off, I'm sure exactly the same with you. Things have just happened because someone either gets to know you or you get to know them, and the spider web grows and one thing leads to another, and you're doing things you'd maybe didn't realize that was the track you're going to go down. So yeah, that's it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Do you ever listen to your first ever podcast and like compare to that? Like that's a fun experience, isn't it?
Like I said before, I don't think I listened to myself for a year or two. I'd edit it, but I wouldn't edit myself because I just couldn't bring myself to listen to my own voice. It was brutal. But I suppose if you look back now and listen to your first one and thought, oh, that's really good, you probably haven't come very far.
Yeah.
So it's got to be horrendous, hasn't it? It's got to be bad. But yeah. So you said you've always had just flip it back on you now. You've always had that entrepreneurial head on you?
Yeah, well, I did, but I don't think I fully realized it till I was in my early 30s, late 20s, early 30s, because the whole Just Fly Sports started when I was 3 out of my 4 years through Wilmington College. I was age 27. And all before that, I had a lot of anxiety in college. I don't think it wasn't like, I don't know, whatever levels of things, but I had anxiety about what am I going to do? Because all I knew was I like sports, but in strength and conditioning, I just hear kind of horror stories for how many hours strength coaches work and how little they get paid. And I was originally signed up in sports medicine, but after 2 years of spending time in the training room and see athletes who just kind of came in there to have someone take care of them and they didn't really want to get better, I was like, I don't want to do this. I mean, it's just my experience. I'm not saying that's bad. I do all sports medicine people, zero offense. And I do like some of the, square one system I've been doing, like those types of events. I like learning about that. It was just that situation just really turned me off to it. And I just, even this coaching, it's like, I just kind of guess I accepted, well, hopefully I could just make a living off this. But I think I would have never had that anxiety if someone just said, look, like the power is in your hands. You can do more than just this. And it wasn't until I was 27 that I think I realized that for the first time. And that's when I finally decided to pull the trigger and start Just Fly Sports, because I've been writing a blog for a while. That was just it was kind of like maybe a dip, I didn't ever know that would become anything. I don't really remember what I was thinking when I started. I started writing at age 23, I guess I'll just say, as I had a blog. And a lot of people were following it, even when I was back that young, and more than I had realized, because the first time we dropped the email opt-in when I was 27 at Just Fly Sports, we had about 350 signups right in the first day. And that was like right in the, so I was like, I don't know, so many people reading my stuff. Like, that's cool. And I think the more that grew, the more I was able to really, and it's just belief systems. So, this is athletics, this is life. My whole life, all I ever heard was just grow up, get this job that pays X, Y, Z. And I just my soul wanted nothing to do with that. Not that I want to coach, of course I do, but I just think that I've constantly learned more about myself through starting that website at age 27. And then also partnering with Jake Clark, who does all the back end stuff and stuff I could never do, and just realizing, look, Jill, you can't do it yourself. And I've just been realizing more about who I am. And that was also a big part of even just taking kind of a leap of faith to leave a full-time job with a wife and 2 kids as well. You learn more, the more you break down the old belief systems, the more you're empowered. And I think that journey to me has been, it's been a really beneficial one. So it's just been and now here I am at 36 and I'm like, this is who I really am. Like this. And if I could say anything to myself at 21, when I'm sitting there lying on my college dorm bed, like worried that this job only makes X amount of money, and how it's like, yeah, you have the power inside you. We live in a world where you can do so much. And so, it's been more manifested to me as I've kind of moved along this whole thing.
Yeah. I was speaking to someone today actually about the jobs market. And if you go on the websites, especially here in the UK, there's not many jobs, and that may scare people, but the opportunities are endless. So the lack of jobs may scare people, but the actual opportunities that can be created in people's communities, in people's own communities, yes, and how the qualities that a strength and conditioning coach will bring, which are wider than I think many coaches think, means that the opportunities are endless. Like you've said, we're in an age where I'm speaking to you in Ohio and it's 6:30 my time, and you're sat in your bedroom like recording a podcast. Like when has this ever been able to happen? Never. So the opportunities are endless, which I think is just frees your mind to think the power is in my hands. I'm the one in charge. I can do something about it, and you clearly have done. So that's great.
Yeah, it's been good. I think part of it too is Ron McKeefery said this, who wrote CEO Strength Coach. I think he's at Fresno State now. And I believe he said this on my podcast. I'll always remember it. He's like, look, like you can work with, and there's nothing wrong with working at the highest tier of athlete at all. I mean, and I spent a good portion of my time at Cal working with Olympic swimmers and learned just a ton from them. But to work, if it's like, I want to be at this level of sport, it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of time and family. And I have found that I've had opportunities there, but at the end of the day, if I am just learning and growing every day and in a meaningful way, and as long as it doesn't matter if I'm working with an 11-year-old athlete or an Olympian, or just it doesn't. If I've gotten that point where in my mind this does not matter, as long as you go and you give it your best and you're working in love and serving, and it's a good thing. And so again, I mean, I still do hope, honestly, I would love to be a coach of the Olympics in track and field someday. That's one of my goals. But I'd say I'm happy where I'm at now. Like it's been a good thing. So.
Mm-hmm. Sounds great. So just bring it back onto philosophy. I'd like to get, and I always find this really interesting how people frame it and how deep people go in things, but just your philosophy as a coach, and then we'll use that as a bit of a jumping off point to dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, what's my philosophy? So that's a big one. So I'll just say I think I can start with, I don't want to be a contrarian, but I guess my goal is to start with the human being, and I start with nature. And so I'll draw that in two parallels. One, start with the human being means if I'm training an athlete in any context, be it's track, it's a weight room session, I'm just outside, we're just doing something fitness related, maybe it's a trail run. I want to start with what makes you a human being. And so I got this, two people in my life have been really podcasts or friends. One, Rafe Kelly, I've spoke with him on and off my podcast. Evolve, Move, Play is his business. And he comes at, he has, I think, a sociology background as well, or human development. And so he talks about approaching the training session from one of, basically it's like being a human being first. Is there a smile on your face? Are you laughing? Like, it's almost like I think about the strength and conditioning industry. It's like, we're a young industry. Like we're what, 50 years old? I mean, whenever Boyd Epley, what was that? Like late 60s? I don't even know. We're like, I mean, and you look at like the medical industry and how long has that been around, and look at the stuff they were doing in the 1800s. They're like, what in the world? Like what's going on here? And so I just think that I look at training and I like, yes, I think a lot of what we're doing is good, fundamentally good. But I just think that we still have a lot that is left to learn. And I think about a lot of training is something that we've created all this. Like a barbell squat is not something that you find in nature. All the crazy exercises on Instagram that get a bunch of likes is something someone invented. But to me, the learning, the learning and the exercises, to me, I want to be able to direct it back to how the human body moves and locomotes and how the gait cycle works and how we move in alternation. And I do believe in bilateral exercises. I'm not saying I don't believe in that, but I'm just saying the way we coach stuff, like who invented knees out in a squat? Who invented through your heels? Where did this, like, we're a young industry and people act like these things are just the way it is. And I see it in my athletes. Like when I was at Cal, I would have other athletes like occasionally trying to help out their teammates. They're like, through the heels. I'm like, who told you that? How do you know that? How do you know this is the right thing? And so I just think a lot about, or even movement prep. So if we're in nature, do we see movement prep? Like if an animal is being chased, I mean, I get it, it's different. It's that's a little bit of a straw man, Okay, like there's warm-ups are good because obviously an animal has zero warm-up if it's running from somebody. But how did we get to this place where, okay, we're in the weight room, let's activate XYZ muscles, and we treat it from, it's like you look at the bias and the inherent bias, it is a very overcoming concentric bias, it's a muscle-centric bias, it's a machine-based bias. If we're looking at in the laws of human nature, Robert Greene talked about qualitative thinking and quantitative thinking. And I use that term because I think in the book is actually masculine thinking and feminine thinking. And that triggers off, I think, part of people's brains like, that. So I like just thinking qualitative and quantitative. And the qualitative model is a machine-based model. It's the human body as parts and how do each of these parts work. And it's like you would go about like doing an algebra class or a calculus class. It's a linear systems based thinking. Yep. Whereas the qualitative is how do things interrelate to each other. And I think they're both important. But I just think that training athletes has just been so one-sided in a machine and activate this muscle. And it's like, look, I can do TKEs and it might not do anything, like I'm saying, like it might not do zero to the system. Like it's like, okay, here's your quad. But I think, so I've definitely a look at a very holistic approach, almost like a kids on the playground, if you will, on some sense. Like, because if you take kids on the playground and you amplify it, meaning maybe some of these movements have more intense, they have more punch, they have more strength component to it. But the mentality of playing and enjoyment and smiling is there, like, and that almost being like the precedent. That's what Rafe Kelly talks about. Like, this is the precedent. And I'm not anti hard work. I mean, if it comes to like grinding stuff out, I mean, I've been there myself, and I've put athletes through brutal workouts as a track coach. I mean, always within reason. I've never been like a destroy people with volume type person, but I'll demand things out of people. But at the same time, I think at the core, like, if you aren't going in every week and at least like having that basic human, like you're happy to be here, like you're happy, there's a social element to it. There's a learning element to it. Like, I'm excited to learn this new thing. There's a skill element like that. I think that those are really important things that I think sometimes that we miss, or a lot of times we miss. Not seeing the forest from the trees, or not being able to read the label from inside the bottle. And so a lot of it, and I think I mentioned, like, I was turned off as an early intern in strength and conditioning. I think, and I never knew why. I was just like, I'm just not stimulated here. Just saying, do these 3 things and clean, do this and squat. Because I think what I understand now about myself back then was that those were invented things. And I was looking for that feeling I got as a young trainee. Like, wow, this is like, I feel alive. And I just wasn't feeling that same thing in this environment where everything was trying to be reduced to X, Y, Z. And so that has been a big growth of mine. Just if you ask what my philosophy is, it's just trying to here's the 2 poles of quantitative and qualitative. We call it the art and the science, but I think that even brings up some, like, which is better. That brings up the thing of which is better. I'm not saying which is better. I'm just saying, how do you train as a human? And then let's use everything we have to amplify that. Let's use the data in the sports science. Let's use the gait analysis, and let's use motor learning and psychology. Let's use it all to take what's human and then amplify that so we can be the best we can be. And maybe that's the best way I can kind of explain it. And if we said, what's my philosophy, that would be it. So
yeah, no, that's great. And we sat down on Sunday with Eamonn and Boo, and one thing that came very clear to me was, with you, was the importance of the experimentation that you put on yourself, to figure things out and just play with things, see what works, see how things feel. How much has that played a part in you developing not only your philosophy, but how you work day to day? Like, just test it on myself. How does this feel? How can I manipulate this one thing to get the outcome that I want? How important has that been?
It's absolutely massive. Like, it is almost, as far as being a coach, like, I count it as my work hours. It's not even like this, oh, like, work stressful, I'm just going to go work out. It's like, this is work, but this is also awesome. And I think it was these are two very different people. I don't remember who posted this. It was, I'll just say, I just saw this posted, it was like, here's how a coach should structure their day. And it won't be exactly like this, but it's like 33% coaching others, 33% learning. And actually, whose day is like this? But this would be optimally, but 33% coaching others, 33% learning, 33% working on yourself. And I mean, obviously that would be, it would have to be a kind of a utopian environment, I think, for that to really be a reality. But I mean, I'll tell you, I've learned the insights I get, like, it's like, your brain we have these 4 brain modes. We have beta, resting state. I don't remember how many hertz it is, but it may be 12 to 30 or something. Fact check me later if I'm wrong. Then you have the next one, which is alpha, which that's that creativity. That's that, like, you're in the shower and you hit that insight hits you. That's like a receptive insight state. And so for me, that workout is my alpha state. And that's where, like, all this stuff I've been learning from, be it in person, be it someone I had on the podcast, a book I read. That's where all that stuff kind of comes together, and it outputs in a way that I think is hopefully meaningful to the athlete. And I think the thing that I've also had a challenge with is, we talk about, a lot of coaches have the tendency, to just have their athletes what they did. And I also fully realize that, like, I am not the same athlete as a lot of you guys. I mean, for whatever I know there's a debate about the exact neuroscience, but Christian Thibodeau has, like, a neurotyping system, basically 5 different ways to train athletes based off of personality types. And I am an elastic, high novelty, kind of ADD a little bit athlete. And so I realize I cannot project what I like onto an athlete who might be more like, not like, I want to do one task at one time. And I might wait I like personally, like I like weightlifting, but if I do too much of it, as opposed to the ratio of plyometrics and elastic work, it can throw me off. And I realize I cannot project that same ratio onto every athlete. So that's like the hard part for me. And I think that's a really hard part in coaching, is putting yourself truly in the athlete's shoes and really understanding what they feel from, I guess, not just an objective, but an intuitive mindset. Because if you look at how workouts actually get written at the end of the day, that's an intuitive process. I think we all start from like a template, we start, okay, here's this coach to use, I'm going to start using it. But then over time you start intuiting and say, well, how did this athlete feel about this? And then it just really gets into that, like, I guess you could say, qualitative aspect of things. And so I think the best way to be qualitative is to experience yourself. You have to. And I've been able to do a good job of it as part of my career. The thing I think I do kick myself is I wish I would have spent more time. Actually, I spent a lot of time as a strength coach for swimmers, and I did get in the water and learn the strokes and the turns and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, I feel like I could have done more of it, like in more like actual, more fatiguing workouts. Like, what do you feel when you get out of the water? And I mean, it's just because you can only go so far. I think you're connecting with an athlete where they know you've been there. And I think of it too, as like, maybe Kung Fu is something we could all, I don't know I didn't really watch that many Kung Fu movies, but if you are going to learn, like, I don't know, like Batman or like anything, or it's always the hero's journey. You always go to the place, you learn from the master, and then you come back with your new knowledge. But that master always went through it themselves. Like the Kung Fu master, the Shaolin master, they can do everything and they can kick your ass, right? Like, because they know it, they have wisdom. And I feel like it's experiential. And so I think that just being able to, I feel like I'm rabbit trailing, but like that's why I have to try to learn the best I can to be able to put myself in whatever my athletes are feeling emotionally, and just how their body's responding to the work that I'm doing. And then just try to really pick up on through the session, like, how are you liking this? How are you liking this? And I know I'm not like trying to, like, this isn't like a menu where I'm trying to cater your every need. I do need to be hard at some point, and there does need to be like look, this is the line, and you're going to just have to do this today, and you're going to have to deal with it. But then there is, like, generally speaking, I need to be giving you stuff that you are responsive to, because I can't just be, if I'm just like, this is the way it is, there's going to be people who check out. And then a lot of times I think coaches might complain sometimes, especially in the strength sector, we're like, oh, these athletes just don't want to work hard. Well, maybe they just don't like the type of work that you're doing. I mean, like, to me, I can work really hard in a sprint workout, or like, even if you have me do even like a breakdance workout, because I like that stuff, I can work really hard. But if you say, hey, we're going to do German volume today, 10 sets of 10, I'll go for it. But I just know that as an elastic guy, that's going to wreck my body, and I might not be able to really take it to the well like someone who's a little more muscular will. And so anyways, I'm always just trying to put myself in athlete's shoes and really see intuitively how they're going to be responding to what is being given.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting on so many levels, because there's always a complaint of the ex-player getting a job because he's an ex-player, and that's, I can see that people have an issue with that, but it is that empathy for the athlete. They understand, and that connection is so strong and can be so valuable. Although that guy or girl may not be as good a technician, it is that connection with the athlete that they have, because they have the empathy, because they've been there, they've felt it, they've done it, and they can pick up on things because they've felt them things. So it is so important, and I think that probably gets overlooked because of the negativity around the ex-player getting a job. It just came to me there, and I just thought I'd verbalize that. But I think it's really interesting. It is so important to go through that. You're not going to be them, because you're not going to be the elite athlete, but just going through that and experiencing what they experience, I think, is so important. I think you're right.
Yeah, just as much as we can. Yeah, because you're right. Like, I can't. If I'm training NBA players, like, I can't. There's no way I can see what it's like to be in the NBA. But just to try as much as you can to latch onto that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the plyos and the elasticity in terms of your body type. How have you become known for this area? Was that a conscious thing, or was that just following your own intuition and doing what you enjoyed doing and enjoyed reading?
Oh yeah, like how I kind of came to be kind of well known in terms of plyometrics and stuff. Yeah. Well, if you, so my first, actually, I kind of lied. I didn't start writing at age 23. I started a blog on it might be defunct now, but it was called Track Shark, and that was when I was 21 or 22, and it was a blog where I was like just talking about my training, and I guess people read that too. It's funny because ironically that year I did terrible, relatively speaking. Like I high jumped 2 meters 14 in my junior year. That year I started writing. I was like, oh, I guess I'm hot stuff. And people read my blog, and I only jumped like 2 meters 10 that year, 2 meters 09. It was really a poor year. So anyways, but I hit YouTube at the right time, to be honest. Like I started when I was at Wisconsin Lacrosse, I was putting YouTube videos out on just like depth jumps and hurdle hops and just very basic stuff. Like if I would have started that now on this YouTube and Instagram, no one would even look twice. It would be nothing, you know, and those videos are super grainy but you just hit it right at the right time. There just wasn't other videos on plyometrics and depth jumps. And so I think that combined with me blogging and stuff kind of worked together and got me a little following there. And that was my obsession and it still is. I mean, it's always going to be a part of me. It's just, there's still something in me, even at 36. I know I'm not going to set my high jump PR, but I still want to be good, man. Like I really just, it's just, that is the thing growing older is like you have these workouts that aren't like great, and it just still bugs me on some level. I'm better about it now, but it's just like in my blood, man. I'm always, experimenting with everything I can. And I think the writing is just the output of my own just journey in that. And it's a good one, but it was the blog and the YouTube was the big one. And then I wrote a book called Vertical Foundations in I think 2014, which just needs to be updated like nobody's business. I mean, like I would say get it, but I was like, I read that thing compared to what I've learned especially in the last like 4 or 5 years from Adarian Barr, and I'm like, that thing needs to be updated so badly. So maybe that book too, and then just always trying to post on it and just I used to write a lot more articles for Just Fly Sports on it as well, but I haven't written a real jump article in quite a while. It's always on the radar just because it's something I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm. It's just going more down the technical path now, and it's one thing that I picked out. I think you may have written an article about it, but it's definitely one of the social posts about 2 paths of training. I know this is something that when I put it in the list, it jumped out at you and said, yes, let's have a little chat around that. Do you just want to explain where that came from and a little bit more about it, and then we'll, like I say, dive in a little bit deeper?
Yeah, so it's really been something on my radar ever since I've just really started in strength and conditioning. And you start to just see, well, say even actually before I was a full-time strength coach, I was teaching a class on strength and conditioning, like a 3-credit lecture at Wilmington College. And I enjoy doing that stuff. And it's funny because I never had a strength coach as an athlete. I was a figure it out yourself person. I had a coach writing workouts, but no one was coaching me on how I was squatting or doing. I just figured all that stuff out on my own. And sometimes I think like if I would have had someone teaching me all that stuff by the book, I actually am not sure that I don't know that I would have did what I did, honestly, on the college level. And I say that because when I was 25, 26, I'm making the curriculum for this class out of Zatiorsky's Science and Practice. And I'm also in parallel, and that's a great book, by the way. I have nothing against that book. It was awesome. It was more, what got me was I was going through the NSCA, National Strength and Conditioning Association, like how to do a squat, like, because I'm trying to prep people to take the CSCS. And as I'm like, this is at 25, I'm for the first time as a strength coach, because I didn't even have like mentors really like teaching this. I don't know. I don't even know how I got jobs. Like, so I'm learning. It's like, okay, you put your knees out at this angle, and I've heard you push through the heels and all this stuff. So as I'm teaching the class at age 25, which is still my high performance years, I'm still competing in track and doing all the meets with my athletes all the time. And I was the most powerful I've ever been as a human being at about age 25, 26. 35 is standing vertical, which actually I should say that in metrics. What is that? Like 80, 85 centimeters, and then, cleaning 120 some kilos. And I I was doing all right for my competition lift or my track and field jumps had gone down, and my stride length was shorter. And it's like, well, why is all this happening? And so what I believe a big part of that was just over reliance on bilateral sagittal plane. And then also, like, you look at a squat and how a squat's coached, it's like, okay, knees out and through the heels. Well, what's going on here? Because if you watch Olympic lifters actually catching a catch out of the bottom, they're catching that bar in the front squat, you will see the knees tick in a little bit on that reversal. And yet people don't, like I said, the answers are found in nature, because I don't think those people are they're not being coached to let those knees tick in. It's happening because of how we are innately designed and how we're wired to work with elastic energy. But yet, if I go and I coach someone up and as if I'm doing a service to them, which it's not, I'm telling them, so what's happening there? Well, I'm yielding, I'm heading into the bottom of a squat, I'm turning knees out, I'm externally rotating my tibias. But the problem is that bottom of the squat, that folded position, is a pronated position. And so by nature, in actuality, the arches should be flattening and the tibia should be internally rotating. So what I'm kind of teaching someone to do is as far as the shins are concerned and the femurs are concerned, is I'm teaching someone to do the exact opposite of loading. I'm putting a supination bias on the load. And then, the unload is now I am in supination because everything's externally rotating on the unload. But I'm kind of, in my mind, I'm kind of messing with what Mother Nature would have people do naturally as they squat, because, like, I go back to my first point, like, someone invented this. And so I found this first as an athlete who became less elastic by doing all this stuff. And then, and again, if I was just a basketball player, though, or a football player, no one might have ever really known, because, well, my clean went up, my standing vertical went up.
Job done.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Done. But when it came to, yeah, exactly. But what about RSI? You could get, maybe RSI wasn't as good. But then I go into my actual competition movements, full speed sprinting, stride length, actual high jump, actual triple jump, all this stuff. And it was worse. And so, but that's just like high reactive, but at the end of the day, though, we want to operate with that free energy as optimally as we can, because I would also venture to say I was probably a less robust athlete from the gait cycle perspective. How am I storing and returning elastic energy now? And it's kind of nitpicky. It is getting really but I do think there's something to that. And again, yeah, like how do we say we did a good job? Like you said, job done. I got this, I had this happen. But I think there's always things that we can do a little better. And so for me, it's like really drawing a line. And it's saying, okay, is this movement, where is the load and where is the unload in this movement? And where is the pronation, where is the supination? Basically just saying, look, like, and a lot of times, like I think Pat Davidson wrote a really good article called Knees In for the Win in Squatting. This was like 5 years ago. And he was talking about just that, Olympic lifters, knees are coming in. And he was talking about what's happening with the gait cycle, with the pronation at the bottom, those knees are going to tick in. And then you get that supination locking response, knees are coming out. But it's just, I think so often that we think we're doing good by coaching someone up, when at the end of the day, their body is doing it better than we can coach. And then, so the ability to realize that and realize how and when the body is doing a good thing is really important. And so back to my post is, I just think that so often on the quantitative side, the machine-based side, is more of the tendency to, and I would just force, overcome, grit, grind, activate. And on the other side, on the qualitative side, sorry, I had it right, is more of the is the feeling, the sensing, the letting the body kind of flow and do its thing once you've created the polarities. And I just think the answer isn't just, if you just do one pole or the other, you won't get the optimal result. Because if you are all just feeling and sensing and you don't have any like structure, and I think there is some strength that is important, you're not going to reach your highest potential. But if everything is just, machine points, XYZ, do it exactly like this, you're also not going to reach the highest, because now the athlete never got to flow and find their own solution to the movement problem. And so to me, if you just look at most stuff in the weight room that happens, we're measuring the concentric stuff. We don't really take, I think, with RSI is the most elastic thing we can do. And so my goal is just to really drive home this point where let's just understand what elasticity is, and we already know what strength is. But let's really make a drive to understand what elasticity is, and let's just see if those two concepts can come together a little bit more in the average lift that we coach. I hope I explained it well.
No, absolutely. And I think it's something that it probably goes back to something that has come up loads of times, that we focus as strength and conditioning coaches on the strength. I know that it's not typically conditioning what you're talking about, but very strength orientated. Feel comfortable with, like you said right at the start, with the 2x5, with the do this. It's very structured. It's very rigid. We can process it in our head because it's in a box. When it comes to the other side, it's a little bit more fluid. It's a little bit more scary, and especially when you were talking about your experiences, not getting that feel from strength and conditioning. For me, it was quite the opposite. I wanted that structure. I was happy in that box, which I think is probably quite common. I was okay with that, pretty in a bit of a comfort zone. And I think as soon as you step out of that more into into a track and field environment, it's scary because there's lots going on. It is fluid. It is, it's not as structured. So definitely explain that perfectly.
Oh, thanks.
Oh, that's all right. So just to put two polar opposites again in our next little thing I'd like to discuss: horizontal versus vertical jumps. Now, I think again this is what we discussed on Sunday with Boo, and he gave quite a concise answer with his ratios and how he splits his vertical, his horizontal. Is his, not theory, but is his thoughts around that similar to how you would program vertical and horizontal jumping?
Yeah, exactly. I think especially for track, it's a little different now, but for team sports, because in track, your sport is the horizontal jump, if it's horizontal jumps, and Dan Paff had a good example as well of I remember him talking about a high jumper that trained with the triple jumper, all the fall and did tons and tons of bounding, but the high jumper needs to go vertical. Yeah. And then by the time he actually got to high jumping, his rhythm was totally off because it was just too much horizontal stuff. So I agree. Boo had said he really skews the ratio in favor of the vertical versus the horizontal plyos. And I think I mentioned this on the mastermind as well, but I look at a needs-based thing. Do I want you, is it cool that you as a team sport athlete, I can teach you how to bound? Sure. But at the end of the day, you're not a triple jumper. You don't get extra points for being able to bound perfectly. And for me, it's more like if you can just bound and demonstrate that you can store and release elastic energy on some level, that's the big thing from bounding that I want to see from you. That starts at the foot, the level of the foot, because if the foot doesn't have a lot of good tensegrity to it, that elastic energy transfer is not going to be great. And so I think that's where we get a lot of the rudiment type little quick shorter hops that are related to the foot function and the storage and release of energy. And then you can make build the bounding on some of that shorter storage release. But generally skewing in the nature of vertical, I think is good. I think if you look at sport too, we look at strength and conditioning or athletic performance as filling the bucket the athlete doesn't get. Mm-hmm. And what's the athlete doing in sport? I would say even in basketball, it's probably 99% alternating push-pull, run, gait related stuff, maybe 1% jumping, because they're going to jump a bunch of times in the game, maybe 100 times, but how many steps did they take? How many miles did they run? How many unilateral cuts did they take? The ratio of it's going to be by far skewed as this push-pull engine. And so, that being said, I do think that that's another thing too with even the elastic versus concentric is, to me, just the fact that our engine is a horizontal based engine. But now that being said, with athletes, because they're already getting so much horizontal work in their sport, my job is I want to just make that work that you do as good as possible. Meaning I might use some horizontal plyometrics to try to make you a better runner. I want to use that storage and release. And bounding is not running. I will tell you that right away. Bounding and running are totally different things. I am, as an athlete, and I've seen athletes like this, I'm an awesome bounder. And my running, if you look at those Soviet charts of how fast your 100 should be based off your standing triple jump, it said I should be running like a 10.6. I am nowhere close to a 10.6, not even close. And so if there's actually a mistake in over bounding and things, because bounding is really long, it's really drawn out. And in sprinting, things are coming back to you real fast. And you have to rely, you're in a much more folded state, you're in a much more compressed state, and the impulses have to work a lot quicker. And so even when I do bounding, and this is even for like track athletes, I put a priority on a faster actually contact time in a lot of my bounding. I'll play with the contact times and say, a lot of times it's like, all right, here's 20 meters. See how few jumps it takes you to get 20 meters. Okay, cool. But like those jumps maybe were just really long and drawn out, and we talk slow and fast rate of force development, and maybe that was a relatively slower rate because that, so my home base, I know Boo talks about his home base workouts. My home base is elastic energy and fast. And I try to build on that home base. And then vertical, I think vertical is, and here's the thing too, a lot of vertical jumps in sport are jumps that are not, we talk about stiffness and rigidity, but even those jumps are not completely rigid in nature. In a more controlled environment of the gym, they are more so because we can drop from a box and stick it. And then the shin is only going to drop a couple degrees. It's going to be but in sport, watch someone take off to a running 2-leg jump, or even a running 1-leg jump. There's going to be a little bit of a shin translation from a horizontal back to a vertical position. The shin's always moving. And so that is there is a yielding component to that in sport itself. And so where we fill in the bucket or the space, I feel like in the weight room is, well, let me show you a more stiff, a more rigid movement. But that's the thing is, if you do too much of that, that's not, like if I did way too much of that and you aren't getting the jumps in sport, now that's not good either. So anyways, all that to say is we don't jump as much as we move horizontally. I want to use horizontal movements. And when I say horizontal plyos, maybe that's straight leg bounding into a sprint, flex leg bounding into a sprint, different motions like that. Even maybe quick little single leg bounding type hops to work on that cycle, and then take it into a sprint. Stuff that's going to just make your sprinting more balanced and better. And when I balance, I mean like anterior chain, posterior chain. Bounding helps you sense the posterior chain, and you can kind of put that sensation into that. So I want to make you a better runner. And then the vertical is just, we don't have the chance in sport to drop off a higher box and amplify gravity, or create a situation where we can do repeated jumps and focus on rhythms and the way the foot's working and operating. So I think the vertical does offer a little bit more room that we can build on and fill buckets that they aren't getting in an appropriate way.
Mm-hmm. Just to confirm, it was Boo, that was the 2-to-1, wasn't it? The 2 vertical to the 1 horizontal.
Yeah, I think it was that ratio. Yeah, I didn't remember the exact ratio. Yeah. I didn't want to say because I was just gonna say 3-to-1. I was like, I'm gonna mess that up, but I just knew it was more.
I'm sure it was. I think you said it before, but you've mentioned there, and we mentioned it again on Sunday, about the importance of variation. I think it was a really interesting chat between the three of you guys, talking about that. I think it was Boo that may have instigated that, given his thoughts on the topic. What's your thoughts on the topic in terms of the importance of variation when it comes to plyos and jumps?
Yeah, so I'll start with track and just be very quick on it, because I don't want to make it too much about track. Because in track, I'm a really big variation with stuff, because I think, like I said in the mastermind, if you do the same hurdle hops for the whole training year, it's just the like Boo likes to say, the proprioceptive variability becomes so low, and you're doing the exact same kind of contacts, and these are high load contacts. I don't know if this is exactly what happens. I can say this and try to sound smart, but you might say those very specific joint receptors that are involved in that very specific plyo that you're doing over and over again. And a reminder, again, plyometrics are more rigid entities, especially vertical ones, than what we see in sport. There's less shin fall. There's less yielding oftentimes than what we see in sport. So these are high intensity constructs. And if I'm doing the same thing to the same joint pattern over and over, my brain's eventually going to say, I'm going to stop giving you an output, because I don't want to get hurt. And, I don't want to be that caveman in the jungle with a messed up leg and the tiger's going to eat me or whatever, to bring it back to survival. So from just a pure, like, distributing the load perspective, we need to distribute things around a little bit. And so we can, that would be one. And then Boo has said it, proprioceptive variability, just the body wanting to sense different things. And what ultimately, I like to think of it this way, like think of every plyo workout as a new skill to be mastered. And so the change doesn't have to be huge to master that new skill. I don't think it should ever get to the obstacle course on Instagram, point, because that's just, I mean, at that point, what are you training? You always have to ask, you sit down and say, what am I getting out of this specifically from an adaptation standpoint? If you don't want to say it's the ability to be better at an obstacle course. Not that I think I like obstacle courses for kids. I think
absolutely. Yeah.
But I just, it's like small changes to the rhythm, small changes to the horizontal to vertical amplitudes, like hurdle hops. You could just make the hurdles a little farther apart. They could be a little closer. You could have some small hurdles, 3 small hurdles, and then 3 big hurdles, and say, just notice how the rhythm changes. One of my favorite plyometrics that I just started doing recently, as I've started working with athletes here in Ohio, is just having athletes do small, like just no hurdles at all. These are vertical, just small double leg hops. And we want to make sure the foot's working properly, storage and release. They're getting the timing of everything correct. And then when they get to, say, a 5-meter section, now do some high tuck jumps. Okay, now go back down to the low, small amplitude hops. How did it feel differently? And athletes, they'll feedback, they like that stuff. And I think it's just because we oftentimes live in an everything max mentality. We're going to do 20 depth jumps. They're all as high as you can go. Well, God, you're going to be like totally fried after that, and I think about, this is one thing I've done with just my depth jumping, the way I prescribe it and the way I've done it myself. And I've gotten great feedback this is a study I quote all the time. And I should do air quote study because nobody can find this, and it's probably in German somewhere. And if one of your listeners finds it, like, let me know, because I get asked about this a lot. And all I know is that it was referenced in Sports Science by Thomas Kurz, which is like a 1990 book. And then Dan John referenced it in Easy Strength. And that's basically long jumpers. There was 2 sets of long jumpers. One long jumper group would jump as far as they could every jump. I don't know, maybe there's 10 practice jumps and they do as far as they can every single jump. The other group jumped to different targets in the pit, almost like parkour kind of. Mm-hmm. And Rafe Kelly, who I mentioned, has spoke extremely well of the ability of parkour athletes to actually achieve pretty, within a reasonable percentage of the world record in a various long jump without actually specifically training for it. So maybe there's something to that with this, but and I don't know how, maybe it's they jump 23, 24 feet, or I don't know exactly what it was, but pretty good for not training for it when the world record is 29. But the second group, jumped for the hoops and not max every time. And then at the end, they tested, well, who jumped further? And it was the group that didn't go max every time. It was the group that jumped to all the different targets. Okay. And in motor learning, there is different theories for why. That I think the one presented in Easy Strength was called schema theory, like the brain or the cerebellum has these different programs that, and I think in Franz Bosch's book, Strength Training Coordination, there's a little page that had all these different, these colored balls for all these different, skill A, skill B, skill C. Here's all the interlaps of all these things. So you could, on one end, you could just say you're building a more robust motor program by inducing all these different levels. But I think there's more to it than that. I think jumping to not just a max distance takes the pressure off. It takes the adrenaline off a little bit. Because if I'm being asked to max every time, it's adrenaline, go, as hard as you can. And I'm not, if you look at the way Marvin Marinovich trained athletes too, everything was just fast paced, reactive. And I do think there's a good quality there. But I do think when we just ask, our only ask is everything being a pure maximal output, I think that it generates a lot of adrenaline. It's a lot of mental and emotional, go, go, go. And it also, I think, decreases the schema, I guess you could say. And so I've had good success saying, okay, let's say we're going to do French contrast. And you're going to do a squat, you're going to do a depth jump, you're going to do a speed, a squat clean or a speed squat, and then you're going to do some overspeed jumps, something like that. In the depth jump, I'll say, let's say we're doing 3 depth jumps. And in a traditional French contrast, those 3 would be as high as they could. Hopefully there is an outcome, because if you just depth jump into space into nothing, I'm jumping, you will not jump as well as if you have a problem to solve. This was actually my master's thesis research. See, I said I'm going to come back to this.
Get it in there.
So It's buried in I don't even have, this is how bad it is. I was so done with that. I didn't even keep a little book they give you for myself. I just gave some to my family, friends, and I didn't even keep the master's research myself. I'm like, I'm done. I'm not doing research. This is not my wiring to do this. It's some people's, it's not mine. But when I found is I had people doing depth jumps to, they drop and then they jump and they'd hit a target. They would drop and they jump over a hurdle that was preset per their jumping ability, or they just jump as high as they can into space with no target. And what I found is that compared to the outcome goals, having no target or nothing, you will jump about 5% less high. And I think it's because it doesn't give the body anything to organize around. If we look at this sequence of all these joints loading and unloading, it's like, oh, I have to touch that. And the brain's like, okay, I got the program for that. But if it's just, I just have to jump as high, there's more like forebrain in that. I think stuff just doesn't coordinate as well. You know, you almost have to have a powerful imagery of jumping high. So anyways, the rabbit trail. I just wanted to mention my research. That's the only reason I said
get it in there.
Anyways, so what I'll do now is like, let's say there's jump to a target. Okay, it's vertex. First jump is maybe 90%. And I just say, get better every jump. Just every jump, get better. And I find that's just, it's a little more like relaxing to the athlete, but they still end up, that last jump is probably going to be a better output than maybe you would have had with the first max jump in a normal set. Because it's like, it just gets you ready. And spending time I spent time at Cal with world-class swim coaches, people who have been the Olympic head coach on the men's and women's side, so respectively. So I learned a ton by watching swim workouts, and like there's so much gold in here that we can extrapolate to track and strength and conditioning. And a lot of times that what you would hear, you wouldn't hear this in track workouts a lot, but you heard swimming is, I want you to do these these swims, like say these 50s, and each one get better. You'd hear that a lot. And that's not something I ever really heard in track or the weight room, but it was something that it kind of intuitively makes sense, because swimming is a tough sport. You don't want to talk about adrenaline. If you're going to put the pedal down on every one of those swims, you're going to be bathed in adrenaline, and your recovery is going to be really bad. So it's kind of like you want to keep that anxiety a little lower, and you're building a more robust program. Again, I do, and I'll contrast that by saying max is important. Like if we're not but even I think Stuart McMillan had talked about training, like you don't like training at like 90% or something like that versus just straight 100 everything. I think he's talked about that too. Like we can have good gains by not, because what happens in between 90 and 100? Because I think about it's like, okay, sweet spot maybe 93%, meant trying, but then every percent above that, you're maybe bringing in a muscular compensation. You're trying harder. You know what I'm saying? Like there's things that are happening that eventually when you get to a perceived 100 actually make you slower. So I just like that spectrum of doing things that perceived less. And I think that'd be really cool grounds for actually, like, I'd love it if there was more research on that stuff rather than just the long jump study from the 80s, because I think that it could be a powerful change in the way that we, coach all these things and allow athletes to explore and experiment. So that's a variation in the vertical that I like to bring that in all the time. I do want to max, but I don't want it to be every rep. It might be every third rep or something like that. And I think that's where I've changed my tune a little bit.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned it a couple of times, and it's going to be the last thing I ask you about, and that's why so much focus on what's going on at the foot. And it's come up a couple of times. It's come up with Lee Taft when it comes to change direction, deceleration. It's come up with Lauren talking about a similar thing. But in this context, why so much focus on what's going on at the foot, and why such an interest from your point of view?
Yeah, that's a good, thanks for asking that one, because that's been a huge passion of mine the last couple of years. I'm actually working on a book on it that I'm trying to get finished up. And that's, for me, I learned by writing a book, because then I'll say, when you write a book, you realize everything you don't know. So yeah. That's helped me to hopefully have a little more humility when I start to explain this, because the foot is an absolute miracle of nature. I mean, it is like, the more you, and even to the point where it's so complex, I actually know very, very good therapists who are like, the foot's too complex. I'm just going to look at what's happening from the hip above it to help. That's where I go first. I'm not going to mess with the foot right away. I've noticed over time that really good sprint coaches or pioneer thinking sports performance coaches, and by that I mean Chris Korfist was the first sprint coach that I was watching his early videos where a real big priority was on the foot. Marv Marinovich and Gary Marinovich and the Marinovich training systems, who have some pretty good notoriety, I think, in that world, also are really big in hands and feet, like sensory hands and feet. Like if you watch some of the Supercat stuff they even do a lot of hand stuff where that's on the Supercat, there's flicking, like, versus think of everything we do, it's just bar, hold, grip. That's our mode. Versus like, no, the hands do more than that. And the thing is, the hands mirror the feet. Watch someone run, and if their hand isn't a fist, that means their foot is probably more like, versus sometimes when you see sprinters like this they'll have the open hand a lot, where it's actually like doing this kind of thing when you're watching them sprint. So this is a pretty stark contrast to, like, I mean, if you watch athletes who are running fast, running a 40, 100, I would say for every like one person, and I don't think you're going to find anyone in the Olympic final doing this off the line. It's always going to be some manipulation, the hand, the pinky's out. The hand's going to manipulate the foot. And so especially too, you'll see this, like a big thing that I talk about is like, I got this from a Darian Barr mentor to me, is like the idea of when the pinky toe or the pinky finger is up, that will reciprocate in like the pinky toe being up. And the pinky toe, when the pinky toe is up, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but when the pinky toe is up, it actually activates the arches of the foot very well. And so when the first time a Darian was telling me, hey, I want you to do these hops, and I want you to lift your pinky toe up, like I guess that would be extend your pinky toe. He told me to look at my hand, and this is totally subconscious to me, as my finger was out like this.
Oh, wow.
So the hand and the ipsilateral foot they're talking to each other. They're on the same page. You can see what someone's foot's doing by what their hand's doing. And a lot of times, John Garish was on my podcast. He's a strength coach in Florida at Broward Prep, and he would have his athletes do different hand positions for their sprints. With the intention, like this, or like, I don't know all the cultural, like the cultures enhanced. I don't want to offend anybody by doing these different signs. I'm just saying what you see, like you might see a pinky hand, or I invented it with the Darian. I called it taco hand, because you want the transverse arch of the foot to activate more. And if you do these things, you sprint, you can feel it. And what John was saying is he would see like actual changes in the slide by slide of athletes at top end when they're doing the different hand positions, because the feet are picking it up. Right. And so anyways, I want to start with the foot in training, because it's the start point of the whole contact. And we talk about RSI being a big term. I can tell you what your RSI is for the most part before I even see you jump, just by looking at your feet. And the simplest point is if someone has very flat toes, so just very just like flat and just kind of lying there, generally speaking, and they might have tendencies to grip the toes while walking or moving. If I'm like, hey, I want you to stand on one leg for me and do maybe some hip circles with the other leg or something like that, and just start watching their feet. If I see a lot of toe gripping and some generally flat toes otherwise, I can already tell you your RSI isn't very good. The reason why is because RSI starts from just being able to get off the ground fast. It starts from the arch integrity of the three arches of the foot: the transverse, the lateral, and the medial longitudinal. So the beauty of the foot is in nature, like there's three dome-shaped structures that are giving this tensegrity to the foot. And if those domes aren't there, you're already starting off like basically jumping on sand to a degree. Like you do not have that solid base, that solid little steel trampoline, if you will, to pop off of. And so my goal with plyometrics in general is a plyometric, even a depth jump for someone who has that foot structure, like the arches are active. You might see some of the tendons kind of popping out through the top of the foot. You might see a little bit of curve, natural curve to the, not gripping, but a kind of a natural curve with the pads of the toes gently resting. If I see that, I know this is a person who has good tensegrity through the foot. If they're doing like an RSI test or they're doing a quick plyo, I know that they have the force where it needs to be first, and then they can work off that. And so that really determines too, like how quickly I'll progress plyos. Cause like, I think we do this intuitively and naturally as an industry for the most part. We'll say, okay, you're ready for this box when I see you're smooth and quick off the ground, or your heels. Well, I think it was may have been Jimmy Radcliffe, I'm not sure, but like if you're dropping and your heels are hitting, then that's too much. Well, why would the heels hit? Well, the heels hit when those arches, the integrity of the three arches is compromised. And I think that's the problem is we think, oh, well, you're an arbitrary, your stiffness, this is air quotes, in the calf, the gastrocnemius didn't fire hard enough or something. No, it's the arch. The gastroc is at the mercy of some level of the joints in the foot. Gary Ward, who's a foot and biomechanics expert, has a saying that joints act and muscles react. So the first thing that we need to look at that is of prime importance in any athletic movement is what's the skeletal structure and what's the joint alignment, because the muscles are at the mercy of that. I mean, if I have a compromised foot, if I have no platform, all the gastroc strength in the world is not going to give me a stiff landing. It doesn't matter. You're fighting an insurmountable battle at that point. And so I have to have good tensegrity, a sound structure at the base before anything else goes. And so I want to teach that first, at least components of it. For some athletes, that is a long road to the top. If you've been walking for 20 years, and I won't say 20 because all children have this. We just degenerate over time through whatever reason, wearing too much cushiony, comfy shoes, not spending enough time getting sensation. And I think some athletes too just are more, just have better sensory skills innately. And I see that even in my own children. And so there's a variety of factors, but I want that foot to operate well first and then build on top of that.
Awesome. Superb. I've kept you well over an hour with a little bit of a technical issue in between. But last but not least, where can people find the podcast, find the books, read the blog? Where's the best place? Does the old blog still exist, by the way? Do the old blogs?
You know what? I should look that up now. I want to say I may have. Yeah. So go to, it's like, if you Google Jumps Coach 214 and Blogger, I don't even know if Blogger is still a thing, but that was it. I swear I deleted it. I bet you there's still a post or two.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And it's funny to go back and look at your old writing. I mean, it's so yeah, that would be the OG way to look up my stuff. The new stuff, yeah. So justflysports.com, Just Fly Sports on Instagram, Just Fly Sports on Twitter, and then my book's coming out. So super excited about. My one out right now that's kind of my bigger book is called Speed Strength, which isn't necessarily. It does have some stuff on the foot in there, but a lot of it's just kind of a lot of eureka and aha and reverse engineered moments and sprint biomechanics through my mentorship with Darian Barr. Things, again, I found both myself and the athletes I coach to be just a real enlightening, practical. And then as well as if you want my philosophy on just training, period, all the things that go into program design and all that, that's out. And then my book on the foot is coming out. It's called Best Foot Forward.
Nice.
And it's going to be, oh yeah, it took me a little while to come up with that. But it's literally, it's been a huge year and a half journey on just synthesizing the rehab side of the foot, the performance side of the foot. Where do we meet in the middle? How do we train this stuff? How do we assess both performance and injury elements in there? So injury prevention, not injury. Hopefully you don't read the book and get injured. I'm excited about that one. It should be out hopefully in a few months. Working hard on finishing that one. So that's what's on the radar. And yeah, thank you.
Awesome. And podcast on all normal platforms.
Oh yeah, thanks for reminding. Yeah, Just Fly Sports Podcast or Just Fly Performance Podcast. Sorry, I got my own podcast name.
Lovely.
So.
It's all good. All good. Well, thank you for giving up your time. Really do appreciate it. And it's good to finally catch up and get the podcast story and obviously everything else in between.
Yeah, it was awesome. I really appreciate you having me on, Rob.
Pleasure. Thanks, Joel. Speak soon.
All right.